Hello, and welcome to another episode of Conscious Living, where we air every Wednesday at 6 p.m. on 100.5 CFRO FM, Co-op Radio in Vancouver. My name is Marc Caron, as I mentioned, and today I'm really excited about the program that we have because it's a little different than some of the stuff we've done in the past, because today we are going to be speaking about Elvis, the king of rock and roll. And that he was also America's greatest magician. So what does that really mean? Well, our guest today is Miguel Conner, and in his groundbreaking new book, The Occult Elvis, he shatters the mainstream image of Elvis, really revealing him as a mystic, an occultist, and shaman who is deeply immersed in esoteric traditions, drawing firsthand on accounts from Priscilla Presley, the Memphis Mafia, and his closest spiritual advisors. Miguel explores how Elvis practiced astrology, numerology, sex magic, meditation, and even astral travel, while also having profound psychic experiences and UFO encounters. This is an Elvis like you've never seen, or in this case, heard before, and a man whose mystical journey was as extraordinary as his music. So we're looking to speak with Miguel. Miguel, welcome to the program. We're really excited to have you here to share, this really quite interesting research and look at the life of Elvis Presley. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on, and thanks for the very kind intro.
Yeah, well, it's something that I'm always fascinated about is, what really goes on with, celebrities. What do they believe, and what's the backstory or behind the scenes that people don't necessarily know. And, Elvis has been in the media a lot lately in certain aspects, if you've seen it. So we're going to dive into that a little bit more as we start this conversation. But maybe you can tell our audience and viewers a little bit about yourself, how you got into this line of work as a writer and a researcher, because, you've done some great stuff with Gaia TV, Gnostic Radio, and the work that you do. So maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll get rolling from there.
Well, I think the part of the Elvis book, I guess the parallels is if you really look at Elvis' life, he was a seeker. He was always looking for the bigger answers in life. What's after death? What's the purpose of life? What's on the other side of this veil we call reality? And so forth. And he was driven by several reasons, innate curiosity. Perhaps he was an old soul, trauma. Again, a lot of us don't go to these things because life has gone well. We go there because we're broken. So in that way, I was a lot like Elvis. I've always been interested in the esoteric, the mysterious, the occult, whatever you want to call it, because I never really found the reality we were given as satisfactory. So that's led me through many journeys, studying many traditions, trying on many metaphysical and theological hats, and trying different types of media, from books to podcasting to articles and so forth. So I think like Elvis, you and me, we're just seekers. I think it's a simple explanation. We don't have to get too complicated.
That I agree. It reminds me of the Who's one of the Who's great tunes, The Seeker. And as you said, I'm a seeker too, and my partner in production behind the scenes, Michael, same. He's always interested in many interesting things. And, our organization with Conscious Living, we do a lot of work, from consciousness and all the different levels of how do we expand our consciousness, how do we use these tools for a better humanity, not just for ourselves, but for the people we touch. And then there's becomes all these unknowns, plant medicines and all sorts of different tools for meditation and yoga, whatever that is, and what works. So I think it's a really interesting fit. And in what you're speaking about from Elvis, let's dive into that. Elvis being a shaman is not something I would have expected. Being a somewhat Gnostic and things is something I'd heard about before, but not knowing so much. So tell us a little bit about how you got intrigued about Elvis, and then let's really dive into the occult Elvis.
Yeah, I think the shaman might be the least surprising one. I mean, do you like rock music? When we
Hmm.
see our rock stars, whether it's Jim Morrison, the Grateful Dead, it doesn't matter who it is. it is a shamanistic experience when you're at a concert. I mean, it is spiritual, it is therapeutic. You connect. The star seems to know you and know your pain and know how to bring forth what's best in you. Elvis is just the apex predator, or if you want to call it the high priest. He's the font of this sort of what I call vibrational modality called rock music. That's not how music used to be. He made music into an experience, into a healing experience. As I argue in the book, rock music was always never really a form of entertainment, but it was a spiritual movement. When you look at Elvis, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard, they were pastors before they were entertainers, and they were part of this very experiential type of Christianity called Pentecostalism, drawing the dark shadow of the blues and gospel and all that. So I think that's the least surprising, but we can get more into the shaman aspects because I argue that a lot in the book. But yeah, I mean, if you ever told me that I would write an Elvis bio in my life, I'd say, I don't know what you're smoking, but you better share with me because I was never an Elvis fan. I was a Beatles guy all my life. That was where I was. Elvis to me was the music equivalent of McDonald's or Mountain Dew. He's just there. He's just empty calories, whatever. But as John Lennon said, life happens when you're busy making other plans. And there was a period, the summer of 2022, where, as I like to say, I became quantum entangled with Elvis. Suddenly, through a series of synchronicities, happenstances, visions, a lot of it caused by ayahuasca ceremonies that I did. Suddenly, Elvis came into my psyche and I couldn't get him out. And he kept saying, it wasn't visions, it was like an autonomous voice saying, there's a part of my life that the world has missed, and there's a dimension of my existence that the world has missed, and I want you to go and catalog it and put it all together, and that's your mission. And I decided to take that mission. And I did resist, but then I sat down on a cold February 2023 and I started writing this book, and it took 3 months, just came out of me, channeled, I guess you would say. And soon later, I was very fortunate to have the good people in Inner Traditions take the book on, and the rest is here we are right now having this conversation.
That's fantastic. I love Inner Traditions and the work they do with a lot of great authors in this, genre, if you call it. And thanks for the definition and clarity in regards to Elvis as a shaman, because in what you're saying, I actually completely agree with you, and that makes complete sense. Every time I picture a shaman, I'm thinking, a medicine man from the Amazonian jungle or indigenous cultures and things. But, when you talk about some of the greats from that time, because I was a Beatles guy too. I grew up with my parents' music as a young kid in the 70s. There was some Elvis, and I'll say he had some good music and things that I certainly enjoy, but certainly much more of a Beatles guy. But you look back at Elvis, how he kind of broke the rules, started shaking his hips when he wasn't supposed to, and getting people screaming and moving. And, it's just really quite fascinating because at the time, you didn't see a lot of that. So it makes a lot of sense when you compare, rock stars to, modern day shamans in that sense, especially with music, the vibration of it. And we all know music and vibration for healing and transformation and how that works. And at the time, it was really unheard of and so spectacular. So thanks for that great way to explain how he fits into that.
Yeah, and
Now,
also remember in shamanism, theatrics and music are essential to the shaman. They look like Elton John in the 70s, you know what I mean? And
oh yeah, yeah,
Elvis and this,
yeah.
yeah, the entertaining your tribe and healing them through this, extroverted, bombastic music is certainly part of the shaman throughout the world.
Yeah, and when you mentioned ayahuasca, it made me think back to my first ayahuasca experience, and the shaman leading the experience, like say the theatrics, what they were wearing, the tools that they had, and the music was I didn't expect it. I thought we were going to be sitting in dark and silence all night, but that certainly was not the case.
Right.
So it certainly draws some great parallels there. So thanks for bringing that up, because I know a lot of our community can relate to exactly that. So, as we move forward, you know, I know Elvis was really, very much a religious guy growing up and younger, and being a pastor was something that he was passionate about. So how do you think that that connects, especially when you start looking at, if you're talking astral travel, UFOs, different things from an occultist perspective, how does that kind of relate to where he was going? And especially when you mentioned the Memphis Mafia as well, because there's so much speculation of what ended up happening to Elvis at the end of you know,
Yeah,
at
yeah,
the end
that's
of
never
that.
gonna end. Yeah, that's never gonna end. Yeah, Elvis is multidimensional, and 100 years from now, we'll be talking about JFK and Elvis and UFO. Well, our descendants will be having the same conversation. So maybe as robots, I
Exactly.
don't know, but yeah, that's how enigmatic Elvis is. But yeah, as I argue in the book, that it's almost like there was no choice for Elvis to be Elvis, and that's one of the themes in the book is fate versus destiny. And I don't have the answers. I'm a mortal like you, and I hope the reader can figure out. But from the get-go, Elvis, like many shamans throughout the world, one thing about shamans that they're usually broken. And if they're not broken, the tribe will break them. They're traumatized. That it opens the channels of communication. It's that idea of the wounded healer. Those with the wounds can learn to heal, and they have the compassion and awareness to help others. And again, this happens with shamanism across the world. Of course, it happens to all our stars, whether it's Ernest Hemingway or Jim Morrison. You go, ooh, your childhood was, or Michael Jackson. It's that, and he was broken too. Poverty, the death of his twin brother, tornado in his when he was 1 year old. That was one of the top five worst tornadoes in the USA. Killed hundreds of people. Abusive mother. So much broke him. Plus, he was born with supernatural abilities, which he got from his mother, Gladys. She could see shadow people and figures in the night. He had healing powers and visions and all that. And Elvis certainly adopted that. And his mother told him, keep your mouth shut or I'll wash it with soap because he began to astral travel. He began to have vision, voices in his head. They were healers, which wasn't so bad. Faith healing was fine in the South in the Great Depression. But all that together created this already shamanistic figure with the abilities to heal. And when you look at where Elvis was raised, the Assembly of God, it was a Pentecostal church in the South. However, as scholars have noted, Pentecostalism is an experiential type of religion. They've noticed it has the same features as the mystery religions or the Dionysian cult because it's all about you sit there with the music in this church playing the guitar and you're praying and praying and doing and dancing, and you go in an altered state of mind and you start talking in tongues and you hope instead of Dionysus invading you, you hope the Holy Spirit and you start shaking. And so that was already shamanistic. And we have to understand that a lot of Protestants in the United States did not like the Pentecostals because they said they were mixing sex and Jesus. Because once you were, you know, the Holy Spirit entered you, you would be shaking, and men and women would be bouncing off each other. And in fact, whenever you were possessed by the Holy Spirit and you started going on the aisle, shaking and dancing, that term in the 40s was called rock and rolling. So, see what I'm saying? The shamanistic idea was set, but then of course, rock borrowed the blues. And I don't mean the traditional blues, but really the far off blues that was still dependent on African animism and myths and stuff like that, talking about the devil, but it wasn't the devil, it's the trickster spirit of Africa. So this mixture was all there and just brought it out into rock music, into this new form of shamanism. And even music critics, when Elvis was out and Jerry Lee Lewis and Johnny Cash were out there, music critics would go to these rock shows and say, this is a holy tent revival. They've just replaced baby, Jesus with baby. But they said it has the same power as this revival church things. And then it sort of evolved. So, and of course, it evolved later. It kept evolving, right? The 60s Eastern psychedelic scene, David Bowie and his astronaut strangeness. It just kept this music, this spirituality has just kept revolving, but the font, the atom bomb was always Elvis. He was at the head of it.
Yeah, there's a lot there that I can really relate to and appreciate. And one thing that sticks out to me is, the differences you're describing, from a Pentecostal perspective of the music and the dancing and, to the religions, oh, to the religions that banned all of that, almost like keeping us suppressed so that we wouldn't wake up, that we wouldn't have those um opportunities to expand our consciousness, to open up those channels to receive, whether you call it the Holy Spirit, whatever that is, and to see the differences of, probably why that is, keep people controlled. It would be my opinion and experience to that, let alone, which then echoes into what I recall in terms of hearing stories of Elvis, all the things he was told not to do when he was going to perform, and don't do this, don't do that, really trying to control him. And he was like, screw that. He's just went out and just did what he did and, changed the face of public music, anyways, that was mainstream at that time, to even what it is more today, and very much a pioneer in that way. And you saw that with the Rolling Stones, and Jim Morrison being on Ed Sullivan, being controlled not to say or do what they wanted to do, which is kind of define is not the reason of the performance, in my opinion, right?
For sure. Yeah, I was just hearing a story. Yeah, Jim Morrison, when he was in the Ed Sullivan show, he was not supposed to say, "Baby, can we get much higher?" But he said
Yeah.
it. But people asked him, "Were you trying to be rebellious?" He's like, "No, I was just nervous and I forgot to change the lyrics." He really wasn't trying to be a jerk. He was like, "This is Ed Sullivan's house." He asked me, and I said yes. I wasn't, but with Elvis, yes. I mean, we have to understand. I call him the Lord of the Crossroads because we have to understand that after World War II, history changed in a way that humanity had never seen. Out of the ashes of the Great Depression and the carnage of World War II came this mighty American empire called the USA. And we're at the end of this empire right now, but this empire the world had never seen that had incredible technology, incredible money, and just an incredible effect on the world. And the world suddenly turned to this place full of atomic bombs and highways and satellites and UFO visitations and mysterious reds, on the other side of the world that wanted to destroy us. I mean, it was like never before, and it was a huge shock on the psyche of all of the West. But out of this came Elvis because he led people through the crossroads. We have to remember that the word teenager did not exist until Elvis came around. Before it was just this kind of middle place. You're either an adult or or a kid. But teenagers suddenly made themselves known. Elvis's generation, the silent generation, and they were like, "No, we do not like this world. This is not. We are going to go against we're going to go against the status quo. We are going to turn away from the music of our fathers and go into black and Hispanic music. We're going to start looking for alternative spirituality. We're going to start reading comic books, was back then was basically no better than porn. We're going to dress up in different cultures. We do not accept this world because this is in a way, 100 times more dangerous world than it was before, except our parents have a lot of money, So we're going to use that and we are going to go against it. And Elvis was there, the shaman, the Pied Piper, leading this country, healing this country from the past wars and helping the psyche of America and North America cope with this brave new scary high-tech science fiction world. And he was the one, and he was seeding the alternative music. As I write in the book, he was seeding the alternative spirituality in the early 60s, martial arts, you name it. Elvis was there. Even gender roles completely changed around Elvis. Elvis liberated women in many ways. Women could suddenly objectify men and be aggressive and independent. And as I say, you know, the Kundalini came out. If you let your lower chakras light up and go up, guess what? Your mind and Your soul come next. Those are liberated. So Elvis also taught men you can be vulnerable. You don't have to be Gary Cooper and hold it inside and be all chiseled. You can be soft and poetic and and vulnerable. So it's amazing how Elvis changed everything, or at the very least was at the head of this huge change in history, which really the world had never seen before in so many ways.
Yes, definitely such a catalyst of changing times in the middle of the 20th century. Absolutely. So now, in your book, you explore how Elvis had actually practiced astrology, numerology, sex magic, and meditation. So, what was his position, and how did he practice astrology, numerology? And let's talk a little bit about sex magic as well, because Priscilla was pretty young when they met, and I know that he had a penchant for younger women, and we see weird things happening in the world today about that. So how does that kind of all interrelate if we were to start, probably maybe let's start with astrology anyways and numerology, and then we'll dive into the other side.
Yeah, when he got into really fully into alternative spirituality, which was kind of early mid 60s, he was already dabbling with it before in the late 50s and in the 50s. But when he really got his magician hat on, his Harry Potter hat on, he was off to the races, and astrology, numerology were very important to him. However, Elvis never really used it for divination or finding out with the future. For him, it was a way to understand the code of the universe and his inner world and understand others, how to connect with other human beings. So that's how Elvis always did astrology and numerology. He liked doing charts, so he simply could understand this person, my ancestors and so forth. So that's how he really used it, not as again as a divination future thing. I mean, he had amazing psychic abilities. He could read people. He could read the room if you would. It's when you realize how easy he became famous and how he kept making a lot of the right decisions in his life. Yeah, personal decisions, not so much, because he was again a wounded healer. He was self-destructive. He was stormy, but he was always able to just flow through the world through this amazing ability to read reality. And astrology and numerology were tools that he used in his toolbox. And no, and with Priscilla, he never did any of those rituals. Priscilla was just not into that. She tolerated it and then later hated Elvis being in occultism. That's later on with Ginger Alden in the 70s. And it wasn't like the Crowley Egyptian sex magic. It was more again a Kundalini release touching, it was more
Mhm.
subtle, if you would.
Yeah, I can appreciate what you're saying there, just in regards to Kundalini energy and moving of the chakras, but um, when I read, that about sex magic, it was like, okay, what did he really have going on, and what was he up to? Because I know, like say, the history books show it anyways, and how true is it in full detail when it comes down to his relationships. I don't know, just based on what I read and see and watch. So I was just curious about that. Um, and then UFO encounters. What did you find out about that? What was his experience from that realm?
Well, again, he was so ahead of the curve. Because in the 60s, this is a time when, yes, UFOs were all over the place, but people still had this idea of, you know, uh, combustion engines and little green men and linear time and space. And he and his spiritual teacher and others, they were speculating much more advanced ideas. For example, he read Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, so he speculated maybe the ancient astronaut theory is real. He speculated about these aliens having telepathic powers, and they were the ones stopping the USA and the USSR and China from destroying each other. He speculated on how they could move, and he also looked at, for example, the Old Testament, at Ezekiel's wheels and other forms, and kept saying, maybe this is alien craft, maybe maybe the angels are not angels, but they're actually extraterrestrials. In other words, he speculated without ever having to take a stance, like saying, being orthodox about it. So it was a huge interest for him. He read the book of Urantia, the book of Enoch, and wondered if the Nephilim were half-breed aliens and so forth. So very sophisticated. What we're doing today, for the most part, is trying, when the UFO topic seems more complicated than ever. But it was complicated back then if you did the research, and Elvis was doing the research. And as I write in the book, he had three extraterrestrial encounters. And for your audience, I should say that Elvis is like conspiracy theory before conspiracy theory. You remember the tabloids and everything, and you can go to YouTube. There's so much, but everything I get is from lauded biographies, Priscilla, Memphis Mafia, friends, family, and all the experiences or feats that he showed. There's always a lot of witnesses around. So I want to tell people this is not, again, some sort of tabloid sensationalist. This is stuff you can go right now and find this in all these bios that have been around for 20, 30 years, that have sold millions of copies, that have been, that have been, whatever, passed by editorial boards and all that. So, but yeah, he did have three UFO experiences, and he was not alone in any of those three.
Incredible. Yeah, so much more to Elvis than I would have ever imagined in that sense. So again, just fascinating for me, especially because of the influence that he had on, millions and millions and millions of people. And how he, do you feel that he used all of that power for good from a consciousness expansion perspective to wake people up? And part of me answers that question really probably knowing the answer because you've talked about some of that in terms of Kundalini awakening and things. But do you think um, the world saw it that way at the time? Because there was a lot of, don't go, and just like is all sex bad and all of those kinds of things when he was doing it. Though, what was his take on what he was doing? Did he know what was happening as a Kundalini experience or the awakening powers that, the music and his presence had? And how did he use that from a conscious perspective?
Well, when he first started, obviously he wasn't aware of these traditions. He was only 20 years old. But to him, music was very important because he saw the divine and he saw God in that music and gospel and blues and country. Not just that, but the plight of those who suffered. He would talk about, yes, this is the music of the slave picking cotton. This is the music of the southern farmer who's starving to death. This is the music of the pastor trying to get the Holy Spirit within him. So that's how he saw music. Again, he didn't separate entertainment and spirituality or music, or even the lyrics didn't matter. But sometimes they did. I mean, most people don't know that his first number one hit, Heartbreak Hotel, was about an individual who is heartbroken and is going to a hotel to commit suicide. So there is some of that darkness, and that's the famous song that John Lennon said before Elvis, "There was nothing," where John Lennon heard that song and there was this spiritual awakening. Or what did Bob Dylan say? "When I first heard Elvis, I felt I was breaking out of jail." Bruce Springsteen said, "When I first heard Elvis, I felt we were finally all sharing the same dream." So regardless of the lyrics, there was a power, there was a spirituality there that woke up so many people, from John Lennon to David Bowie. I mean, even punk. The founders of the Clash always said Elvis was the guy that made us into the Clash. Joey Ramone from the Ramones always said Elvis embraced punk rock, and we just took a page from him. So it really was very powerful. Now later on, when he went from, rockabilly Elvis to movie star Elvis and sort of retired from being a rock star for like 8 years, he came back as Vegas Elvis. And he still had that power to connect with the audiences, but he starts showing more of his occult side. When you think about it, there he is with looking like Captain Marvel. He's got the rhinestones, the Egyptian motif. He's got the Ankh. He's got the shining lights. He's starting his concerts with the theme from 2001: A Space Odyssey, Thus Spake Zarathustra. You realize, hey, he's really taking this occult shaman to another level when you think about it. Again, the songs don't matter because Elvis could make them into his own. He could find that essence, that power to help others. And you watch some of his concerts, and yeah, the women are going, it's like a bacchanalia with the maenads. They're going into an altered state of mind, and people are freaking out, and he's interacting with them. And it's sometimes dangerous. Elvis used to wear a cape, but he stopped doing that because women would try to grab his cape and they almost killed him in concerts. That's how frenzied these people would get. So I think, and there are stories where Elvis would stop in between songs and he would do a Tibetan prayer just sort of get that energy up. So when you think about it, his Vegas Elvis persona, that is really occult stuff.
Yeah, it really is when you think about when I think back and I start thinking of some of those, you know, shows I've watched, as a young guy growing up with my parents and things. And you're absolutely right, thinking of the different motives. I never even give it
Yeah,
any
he's
real
doing
thought.
karate on
Yeah,
stage
right.
and all
Yeah.
this strange things.
So I want to get into this other question because, in the write-up that I got in regards to your work in the book, one of the things you talk about is it says including the eerie Elvis visitations reported after his alleged death. So I want to talk about that because I've seen some interesting things about Elvis still being alive as a guy named Bob Joyce. I don't know if you know anything about that, but
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
just I'm curious. It's with internet and AI and all sorts of different things, it's always things that make me question. And then when I read the specific word alleged death, it just made me wonder and want to ask the question, what do you think? What did your research show? What's going on there?
I offer some of the possibilities, but of what could have happened, faking his death, going into witness protection program, all that. But I personally believe he left the material building, if you know what I mean. I think he
Yeah.
left. I do think he reached a sort of essence or vibration or mythical energy, egregorial power where he's still with us. That's why he makes as many appearances as Bigfoot, Jesus, UFOs, and the Virgin Mary. Think of being in that company. That's the pantheon of high weirdness. You've made it in 2025. If you're still making appearance, and he does, you can go to the Graceland website right now. They have a dedicated page. You write down your Elvis apparitions or dreams. So they are still happening. And in a way, he's reached really a cosmic level that only figures like, again, Jesus, King Arthur, and others, fairies, achieve in the history of human civilization. That it takes a lot of fame and power and belief and faith. So I think he's still around in some essence or another. I think he reached those levels of divinity or demigodness, if you would. And as I write in the book, I think he knew he was going to die. I think he knew his mission on Earth was over by things he told people, contracts he was writing, changing his will. I mean, there was all this behavior right up to it that even others were very startled. Now you can make an argument he was treating himself so badly. I mean, Colonel Parker said, if you don't stop, you're going to die. And he didn't stop. But then there's an instance where he was talking to his stepbrother, David Stanley, and they're talking. Elvis is reading all these books on the occult, and this is August 14th, 1977. And he tells his stepbrother, hey, David, in 2 days, I'm going to be on a different plane. And his stepbrothers, yeah, yeah, we got a plane to go to Oregon. We can't miss that plane. And Elvis just rolled his eyes like, you're not getting it. You're not getting it. So, and the way, what the rituals, what he was wearing the day he died, and other things that I go in detail in the book, I think he knew that, it was time. And he was never afraid of death. Again, he could astral travel. He'd seen visions. He knew there was a busy, multi-layered universe. Now, only argument I have about Elvis faking his death or anything like that, and I think it's the best argument against this. It's simple. He was an imperfect person, but he was a very traditional person. He loved his family very much. He took care of his family, even distant cousins and so forth. There is no reality in which Elvis would have left his father and Lisa Marie. Just was not going to happen. He would have rather been tortured in a dungeon for hundreds of years than do that. So if he was going to fake his death, he would have taken his daughter and his dad with him.
Makes sense to me. I was just always curious because, you hear all these conspiracy theories, not just Elvis, but Michael Jackson, all these guys. So, I would imagine there's part of you that would think, the fame and all of what comes with that, at some point people may just get tired of that and just not want it anymore. Right. So I can see that. And of anybody in the world who'd have the resources to pull it off, Elvis could certainly do it if he so chose.
Yeah.
Um, and I love what you're talking about is, that connection. And it's not to offend any spiritual people or anything of that nature, but it makes me think of, the yogis who knew their time was coming. They're like avatars of that sense of here to, make an impact on the world by spreading a message and what that is. And each one is different. And I think of, Yogananda knew the time was coming, and, they all have a specific mission within
One
their.
of Harry Elvis's main heroes was Yogananda. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you look at that and, it certainly can make sense to me when I think of it from that perspective, just the impact that he had on the people and the world and the way it changed, just modern culture. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, very true, very true. And he was always a humble person. He knew he had the power to influence millions of people, and as some have speculated now that the book's out, he might have had a choice to become a spiritual leader. Imagine if Elvis had said, I'm starting a cult. You'd have millions of people just sign up right there on the spot. But he was humbled because he had read Yogananda, he'd read Blavatsky and all that, and he knew whether it's Ascended Masters or Freemasons or all that, you are called to it, He believed Jesus just became self-realized and woke up, and same with Moses and Zoroaster and all these figures. So he was waiting in the wings to wake up, to become self-realized, or to be called to go from a rock star to maybe a spiritual. But he was humble. He wouldn't have done it unless the instructions were just so clear and do it. And I should mention too that there were times when he wanted not to be an entertainer. Twice in the 60s, he almost quit the music business to be a monk, a Christian monk once, and then to go to Yogananda's ashram and be a monk there, but he got talked out of it.
Now, did he ever go? Do you know if did he ever go spend time there in California in Yoganaga's on the
Yeah,
center?
yeah, yeah. Oh, he loved going to the ashram. He worked with Dayamata. That was his second spiritual teacher. Did yoga, yeah, meditation. Yeah, it was a one of his favorite places to be for years. And he was there again. Talk about seeding this alternative spirituality. It really was Elvis because he never hid it, but he didn't broadcast it either. And what he would tell friends, he would hand out books, he would have meditation circles and all that. But he didn't, but again, he wasn't going to the press with it or anything like that. So the ashram, Yogananda's ashram, 2 years before George Harrison started going there, Elvis was there doing all that. So I think he was seeding this in the United States to people. And then as many have said, he made the 60s revolution a lot easier because of what he did, because it was cool in LA and Memphis and wherever he went to do meditation and talk about Yogananda and talk about Manly Hall. And Elvis was at the forefront of this.
Well, and the influence, just from a, the perspective of influence. So if you're looking at spirituality and you want to wake people up and wake up the masses, what a powerful voice and, powerful presence where people, if he says something, they're going to listen, and I think that that's, um, a beautiful space for someone who is, seen as a rock star, or maybe a rebel rouser from, the people who don't want to change or aren't waking up, to really push forward with. Because as we see with any great spiritual teacher and spiritual leaders, they often, almost always, go through, I would call it the gauntlet, or that really tough time, as people are doubting them or questioning them or wanting to, put them out as a heretic or whatever that may be. So we're running up time. We got about 10 minutes left, Miguel. Is there anything else you want to share, specifically about the book and what you learned within your research in this? Well, before we wrap it up.
Oh, there's so much. I mean, the book really covers a lot of ground, from, again, all the different occult modalities he had, the supernatural feats that he was able to do, again, always with a group of people. Yeah, Elvis being alone there was a small chance that was going to happen. Let's put it that way. He had to be basically in his bathroom in Memphis.
Yeah.
And people say, well, did he die on the toilet? Actually, there was a barber chair where he used to read. So some say that he was going to the bathroom is more of a myth. He was on the barber chair because that's where he read. But yeah, the supernatural feats like, changing the weather, healing people from headaches to broken legs. Yes, again, the astral travel, telekinetic powers, making bushes move, and so many other things. As many strange rituals like, creating pyramids and saying, the power of cosmic Christ compel me. I mean, there's so much in the book, and it's just a rich tapestry of somebody who ultimately was just trying to seek a different and better reality for himself and try to understand why we are here, why we suffer, why did he have to suffer so much? And yeah, he wasn't perfect, but then again, do we
Who
expect that
is,
from
right?
our wounded healers? Yeah, and do we expect that, from our wounded healers, whether it's, again, Jim Morrison or Ernest Hemingway or, yeah, name your star that really changed your life and see how tortured and tormented they were. Sylvia Plath, it doesn't matter. I mean, these people went into hell, to the underworld, like a shaman, and they were destroyed, and because a shaman often gets dismembered, and they brought back this medicine, and they had so much empathy in relation to us to help us as a tribe. So those are the things in the book, and then there's so much more I'm still learning because, again, the book came out of me, but I feel like I've only just begun. Like somebody I was talking to who lives where Elvis lived in Tupelo, Mississippi, not too long ago, they discovered there was a Native American burial mound close to where Elvis lived, and it's just been discovered. And you wonder, was he playing there? You know what I mean? What was he? Because he
Yeah,
was a
yeah.
very sensitive child. He might have been playing there, and these ancient spirits might have touched him. So I am learning so much. So I feel like with Elvis, we've only just begun, as Karen Carpenter might say.
Beautifully said. And the one thing I just want to really kind of, share what came up for me when you were talking about, his past and the pain and the what they go, stars and celebrities, what they go through before they ever, I'm air quoting, but make it or become famous. Is so many people don't know what they've gone through, and then they idolize people, not knowing their full backstory, the work that it took, the pains, the challenges, all the things that they overcome to even get to that place to be, whether it's a performer, a sports star, musician, actor, it doesn't matter. It's all the hours of preparation and practice and pain and suffering that they go through before they ever make it big, and Elvis is, I think, is just a great example that not everybody knows about.
Yeah, and there's no guarantees either. I think that's what I like to tell people.
Yeah.
Nobody ever said, "Well, I'm going to be a mystic and that means I'll be enlightened and I'll be happy." And it's like, no, 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 that's not the way samsara works, does it? I mean, you can look at Alan Watts. Love Alan Watts. He died an alcoholic and a miserable person. Aleister Crowley. I've heard Krishnamurti died very depressed. Moses didn't get to go into the promised land. Look at what happened to Jesus. I mean, you go through all these figures who are very enlightened and spiritual, and some did, like Yogananda, kind of make it, but others no. I mean, being a human is being a human. We are going to be depressed. Things are going to go bad, and our health is going to fail us, and some of us will be addicted. And even the idea of the wounded healer, as I show in my book, across many cultures, the shamans often ends up being a very broken down drug addict person because carrying the weight of those forces, carrying the spiritual identity of the tribe, dealing with the spirits can eventually it can be too much. And I see that again, Elvis and our favorite rock star and all these other spiritual exemplars that I mentioned. Sometimes it doesn't end well. There are no guarantees, but sometimes I do believe in that old cliche. It's the journey, not the destination.
Yeah, I
It's
love that one too.
it just works.
Yeah. And it's true, and I think that it's a great message and a great thing for people to consider while they're on the journey of being a seeker is, you know, it's important to be able to do the work because, you can get stuck in some challenging places. And we are human and we have to be able to, shift and flex and flow through different states of consciousness and whatever that is. And it could be tough because people get stuck, and that could be a painful experience, and you don't have to be a rock star celebrity to experience that.
No, no, not at all. And that's the one thing I liked about Elvis. His mother always told him, we are all equal under the eyes of God. And he really took that. He never saw himself as a higher caste. He never was derogatory against any religion or group. He dated black women. He was really an American should be at his best. Now, yeah, but and of course, I think the one religion he didn't like was Scientology because he just thought they were godless. He was like, "Where's your God? Why do you keep asking me for money?" That's the one time he was derogatory towards a religion. But other than that, he loved all cultures, musics, religions. He thought it was just part of this wonderful tapestry called the human race.
Beautiful. Well, wow, I've really enjoyed this conversation, Miguel. It certainly opened my eyes and, certainly see Elvis in a different light, absolutely. And, for anybody out there who's, intrigued and curious to learn more, you can get The Hidden Magic of Elvis Presley, Rock's Greatest Mystic Revealed, put together by Miguel Conner that we've just had the chance to speak with. And you can get it wherever you buy your books online these days. Amazon's always a big one. If you've got anywhere else, Miguel, you want to send people to, maybe more direct to eliminate that kind of, mass purchasing, that's one thing. But it's certainly out there, and I just really appreciate this conversation because it's, I think, a great eye opener into Elvis and his legacy and how it really appeals to consciousness and spirituality and to all of us as human beings, all being equal.
Yeah, yeah, no, well said. I think Elvis' story is our story again in many ways, except he just did it on a bigger scale because that was his kismet, his destiny. And yeah, you can find the book, yeah, The Usual Suspects. You can get it directly at Inner Tradition, Simon and Schuster, which is the mothership, or bookstores will have them too. Some libraries are carrying them. So however you want to get it, there is a way right now, and it's doing very well. It's selling very well, and I'm glad to hear that because again, Elvis was called by some destiny, and I'm doing some destiny, and that's the best we can do is hear our call and hopefully help others.
Now, is it available on audiobook? Do you know?
Yes, it is available on audiobook too.
Awesome. Great. Well, Miguel, before we sign off, is there anything specific you just want to share with our listeners and our audience? Message, inspiration, anything you want to leave them with, how to get a hold of you, how to learn more about you and your work and your other books and materials.
Yeah, if my website is very simple. It's just my name, Miguel Conner, all lowercase, one word, .com. And then you have two choices. One part is the Elvis stuff, where I have, for example, my blog, my Substack, where I'm showing more research that's coming up on Elvis, maybe a second book, maybe. Oh, it'll stay there. I have a new podcast called Gen X Wasteland, where I talk about Elvis and culture and all that from MTV generation perspective. But there's also the other stuff. I have my podcasts and books and articles on Gnosticism and Hermeticism and all that. That's my day job, if you would. So people can go there, pick whatever path they want, social media, contact forms, all that good stuff is there.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for all the great work you're doing in the world, Miguel. Really appreciate you taking your time out today from Chicago, Illinois. Um, Thanks for being here on Conscious Living.
I'm going to do the Elvis impersonation. Thank you. Thank you very much. He is very quotable. You got to admit, he's very quotable.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. Well, so you've been listening to Marc Caron here on 100.5 FM CFRO in Vancouver, where we just had a great conversation with Miguel Conner about his recent book on the occult Elvis. If you want to find out more, you can watch the video on YouTube and our social media channels, as well as you can see it on our website, consciousliving.radio.org. Until next time, everyone, take care of each other.